Hello, everyone, and welcome to IMAGI-NATION TV today. And we've got a great episode coming your way. We're kicking around the idea of flipping the script this week. And what does it mean to pick up the pen when someone else has written a story and to write a different story, to change the narrative and to potentially change what history looks like, and potentially change what today looks like, and potentially change what the future looks like. So we're pumped to have Bruce Pascoe joining us for the keynote a little bit later on. And we've got Lindisfarne High School as our official partner school today. And we've got Zephyr as the co-host. Zephyr, how are you going?
I'm going good. You?
Yeah, good. How are you feeling about co-hosting today?
Feeling it's an opportunity. I'm really ready to get it on.
What's some of the big questions you'd love answered in your life?
Well, like, is there aliens?
Yeah, I'd love to know if there's aliens. That's actually a great segue because we've also got Sienna and Elise here with us from Lindisfarne High School. And if you both want to chuck yourself off mute for a second and say hello.
Hi.
Hi.
We're going to jump into an activity that we've just launched. So we've just kickstarted a feature film called Imagine, where we've opened up one live Google Doc and we've made the document free for everyone to jump into. There's no restrictions. And over the next 4 weeks, we're trying to write a feature film together to see what happens when we come together and we collaborate on an idea and we don't put restrictions around it and we see what happens from there. And then after that, we're releasing 500 plus filmmaker grants. So if you want to create a feature film and be a part of that experience, you can jump on our website, lock in an application and then grab yourself an IMAGI-NATION hoodie and then you get the chance to be able to create a feature film with us. So right now we're going to go into writing with Zephyr and with Elise and with Sienna from Lindisfarne High School. So we'll check out a quick video and then we'll jump onto the Google Doc and do a quick writing activity.
Most of us love the story of the child who is sidelined by life because of the situation they were born into or the color of their skin, and then one day becomes a champion or a success or a hero. This is the kind of story we hope will inspire marginalized kids to dream big and make their dream come true. But what if we did it differently?
How are we gonna do that?
Flipping the script is about not letting the hand you've been dealt stop you from achieving your goals.
Imagine realizing that you can actually flip the script that's been given to you and start writing your own story.
We have to challenge the norm.
So what if we ask the kids we don't usually hear from, the ones who are sidelined by life, to be our storytellers?
The project Imagine gives us all the power to flip the script.
We invite all of you, all humans everywhere, to join us in a live experiment.
The time for talk been over. It's time for some action.
And there is genuinely no limit to what you can achieve.
There is no limit to any imaginative juices.
Use that kind of like just around the corner idea, so you can bring in technology and ideas or social constructs that don't exist and bring them into this world.
Let's write the next chapter of human history collectively.
Imagine the wealth of stories and ideas just waiting to come into the world. Imagine the new horizons, if we flip the script. Welcome to the Imagine Film Project.
Okay, so Zephyr, you said you'd love to know if aliens existed. Well, we've done 3 days now of writing this film on the show, and then people have been jumping on and being a part of the Google Doc and building the story out. So the story that we've got so far is we've got a kid who's 15 years old who has a really messy bedroom, a super messy bedroom, like the most mess ever Elise, the most mess ever Sienna, like it's the messiest bedroom you could ever imagine. And then there's this claw that grabs this kid just before he's about to go to sleep and then pulls him underneath the bed. And then when he goes underneath that bed, he ends up on a boat, and he's on a boat with an alien dog. And then he's got all these islands he's looking out to, and he's trying to work out which island to go to. Now, this kid is a bully and has been a bully in his life. And what's been proposed is that the islands are maybe where we're going to find other people that he's bullied at different periods of his life. So that's the start of where we're at. You guys get to now make up whatever you want to, and we're going to try and fit it in, and then you get to be official writers on a feature film. We're going to do it for about 2 to 3 minutes, so go for it. Give me any ideas.
I think the alien dog should be named Jeff. And he should have 8 tentacles.
And what?
The alien dog should have tentacles.
The dog should have, let me just get that note because I think that's classic. The dog should have 8 tentacles or eats tentacles?
8 tentacles.
Okay.
Then he should have like, what out of his 8 tentacles, he should have like one half one.
Okay.
So there's like a small one and then all these other big tentacles.
That's great.
And his tentacles can shapeshift to chopsticks and stuff.
I love that.
And when they're going to find the bullies, their first bully's name is George.
And George likes to eat ramen noodles.
And the guy who's really messy bedroom, he also really likes cake with jam in it. And he has an obsession for it. So whenever he's like on a mission and he sees some jam cake, he just like needs to eat it. And he has a fetish for toes.
I don't know.
Okay, so the book, we don't have a name yet for our 15-year-old who we're not sure whether it's a guy or if it's a female or if it's a gender non-binary character. What's a name for our 15-year-old?
Hank.
What was that, Sienna?
Hank or Brick.
Sorry, say it one more time for me.
Hank or
Tank?
Brick.
Tank?
Yes.
Did you say tank? Okay, cool. All right, could be tank or brick. All right. Any other final thoughts?
No.
Okay.
All my dicks have been played.
Well, you're now all officially writers on a feature film, so we'll share the doc with you so you can tag the areas where you added ideas. And if you've got any other thoughts, then that'd be fantastic to keep them coming. We've got comments coming in from the chat line. This is awesome. Parul said tentacles to chopsticks. Wow. Lunachin said ramen noodles. Yes. Tom Wensley said, haha, this is wild. We've got other comments coming in saying it's going to be a great show today. I can feel it. Jason saying I've got so much respect for Bruce Pascoe. My 9-year-old quote. My 9-year-old quoted Dark young. I've got so much respect for Bruce Pascoe. My 9-year-old quoted young Dark Emu for a project last week, and I was so happy with his ideas. Brilliant to hear that from you, Jason. Looking forward to catching up with Bruce shortly. And now we're going to go into our 60-second challenge. So we've got our principal of Lindisfarne High here today. We've got Stuart with us. Stuart, how are you?
I'm going well, Jack.
Thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of this challenge. And we're going to get the clock started and ask you the biggest questions of all time. Here we go. What's your idea of perfect happiness?
Walking on a beach, maybe with a fishing rod in hand, with the sun setting.
Which living person do you most admire?
Living person. Oh gosh, you've stumped me there. Probably my dad, I think.
On what occasion do you lie?
Maybe to patch things over in the family. If there's a bit of a disagreement, I might lie a bit.
what quality do you most like in puppets?
In puppets, the ability to make people laugh.
Which talent would you most like to have?
I'd love to be able to sing and hold a tune.
What is your most treasured possession?
Gosh, I've got a really old cricket bat that was signed by Don Bradman that I found in a antique shop.
That'll do us. Stuart, thank you for joining us. Thank you for partnering with us today on this episode and having your students involved. And it's great working with leaders like you who want to see things change. And thanks for being a part of the show.
Thanks so much, Jack.
Pleasure. Zephyr, how did your boss go?
Excuse me?
How did the boss go? How did the principal go, do you reckon?
He did amazing. Like, probably the best one we've ever had on the show.
Yeah, good. That's a good wrap. Good wrap. All right, we're going to jump over and catch up with Stephen Bishop quickly, who is from Cirque du Soleil, and he's a clown with Cirque du Soleil, and he's going to bring us 180 seconds of Wizardry, and he's recorded this. He's over in the UK at the moment, so we'll catch up with Stephen now for our Wizardry section, and then Bruce is just around the corner.
Hello. I'm Stephen Bishop, and I am a performing artist with Cirque du Soleil show Bazaar. I am the maestro. I'm from Brisbane, but here I am in confinement in Brittany, France. This is my story. You've got to follow what you're curious about, what you're interested in. That's the first thing. And try many, many things, because you never know where anything's going to end up. You know, when we were young, we tried absolutely everything. You know, judo, fencing, macrame, painting, singing lessons, piano, trombone, drums, anything we were allowed to try it. And that was fantastic, because all of it now, as a clown, I'm using. And I think the other thing that's very important is to develop a discipline and a work ethic, because and it doesn't matter what you do, there is some part of that job that's going to be just really, really hard work and rigorous work. And I think that's, you know, certainly with clowning, it's something you have to have. You have to have some technique, and you have to have gone through a whole bunch of exercises so that you know that you can pull out a performance every night. I see a lot of kids that are really, really talented at something. I think so many people have got so many talents at things. And it's not necessarily that talent that's going to make you successful at it. It's the desire and the passion to keep going and to learn techniques. Even as a clown, you're not funny every night. That's impossible. The only reason why you can do a good show every night is because you've got a lot of technique and you know what you're doing, and you have that basis of knowledge of knowing this joke works, and then you work with the audience, and then you create some fun, and then you all have fun together. That desire to perform, you can easily transpose that. For example, now the creative project that we've got is working in this garden. So that's the creative project right now. So that's the other thing you'll find. Whatever skills you have in one area, they're immediately transferable. I think the reason why I'm still one of the clowns that's continually employed is because I've just never stopped. Everybody else falls away. They lose interest, or they try something else. But perseverance is a very important quality.
Never stop is a pretty powerful message, isn't it, Zephyr? To just get up every day and keep putting one foot forward. And we've found with almost every mentor that's come on the show so far that most of them has said part of their success has been the fact that they just got up and they kept going and kept going and kept going.
That is what drives you to become something great.
Yeah, I think it can build you to, you know, and I think great is a really complex idea for us. Like sometimes we might think that great are the people who are the posters on the walls. Like I'm watching Michael Jordan's Netflix doco at the moment, and
same. I watched it last night.
Yeah, he was when we were growing up, like on everyone's walls, pretty much everyone was wearing Nikes, and that period of creating celebrities who we saw as these perfect people, and often they're entertainers and in worlds that sort of distract us from the reality of the world that we operate within. And then there's everyday heroes that go about, you know, we're lucky enough to have our garbage picked up this morning, and there's amazing garbage men and women that go around and pick up our garbage every day, and I reckon they're pretty great. And then there's teachers who teach every day who are pretty great, and then there's parents,
especially the doctors that are working right now during this pandemic.
Yep, absolutely. And, you know, mums who take time out of the workforce to raise every single one of us, for us to be in their bodies for 9-10 months, and their bodies change so we can have life. There's lots of people that are great that might not necessarily put that label on at times. But as we flip the script, it's time to get into introducing our keynote speaker for the day. So we have Bruce Pascoe joining us today. Bruce, thank you so much for being a part of the show. And And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being someone who has helped flip the script, not only for people in this country, but around the world as we've thought about our story and our history as Australians and the people who were the first Australians here. So thank you for what you've done and for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, the stage is all yours, Bruce. We'll start the timer in 20 minutes and we're in your hands.
Well, the arts of any kind, storytelling, clowning, performing, singing, playing music, writing, they all show, I think, the creative side of human nature. And if we don't have that, then all we are economic units slaving away in someone else's factory. If we don't have some kind of culture in our life, then we're just slaves. And I was grown up by my parents to believe that no one was my master and no one was my slave. That you have to treat every person that you meet as a human and respect them. And for me, the world was very confusing. You know, I began life in a Christian family, and by the time I was 14, I had completely lost faith in how the church worked in the world. And it wasn't until I began talking to my uncle and later on other uncles and aunties that I realised that Aboriginal Australia had a spiritual life, not just a spiritual life, but an economic life, a social life, a creative life. And to me, the spirituality of Aboriginal Australia was so much more compelling than the Christian religion I'd grown up with. It was so much more inclusive. In the church that I belonged to, a young 15-year-old girl became pregnant, and as a result, the church kicked her out. I thought it was the most un-Christian act. I couldn't believe that adults could do that. So I became very disappointed, very disillusioned in the authority figures around me in the church and at school. So I was trying to find a logic for the world, a reason why the world behaved like it did and what it might become. And I was very, very fortunate to have really close family. And my family all lived remotely at that time, and they're all storytellers. My auntie could tell a story that could last 3 or 4 weekends. We would catch up with family every weekend, and this lady who has been my inspiration could make a story last for 4 weeks, and you couldn't wait until Sunday to hear the next episode in this story. She was very funny, but she was also very serious. And I just grew up thinking that storytelling was what everybody did. I wasn't particularly good at the performance of storytelling, but I knew that I could write a story. I had one or two teachers right in my 12 years of education. I had 1 or 2 teachers who encouraged me to tell stories, and with the backing of my parents and my aunties and uncles, everyone supported me in that pursuit of storytelling. I wanted to try and explain the world to myself, but I also wanted to, through the stories, ask other people, is this what it's about? Is this what we're trying to do? Is this how humans should behave? So I started writing poetry, mostly about girls who didn't love me, for good reason, it turned out. And then I got into writing stories, and because of the influence of my family and the increasing influence of my uncle, who was talking to me about the Aboriginal background of our family, I found myself completely overwhelmed by Aboriginal story, stuff I'd never heard before. Despite my family's good intentions, Aboriginality wasn't part of our family conversation. So I was led into the story of Aboriginal history and occupation of Australia, and none of it I'd learned at school. Not one scrap of it had I learned at school. So I was completely at sea. And the way I navigated that sea was through books, through talking to elders, but most of all through writing. So I started telling stories that I'd heard. Sometimes the elders, I'm thinking of Auntie Bunter in particular, she would say, you can tell this story, but you can't tell that story. So I was learning a discipline as well. And discipline is so important in any aspect of work. And writing is work. You have to work hard at it. If you want to be good, you have to work at it every day. And you have to discipline yourself to begin writing. You have to discipline yourself to make it as good as you can. You have to discipline yourself in the Aboriginal world anyway, in making sure that the story you tell, you are allowed to tell. Non-Aboriginal writers never have this problem. They think they can write about anything, anytime, that's called liberty. But in Aboriginal life, what we're writing about is actually responsibility, and the two aren't the same. So all through this time, I was finding out stuff about our history. First of all, that there was a war for possession of the Australian soil between the British and Aboriginal Australia, something I hadn't learned at school. I couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't get my head around how a society could completely blanket the truth of the occupation of Australia and not have one skerrick of that information in my schooling. As you can see, I'm a particularly aged individual. So I've, right through my school life, I did 12 years of education. 16 years of education, actually. Not one mention of it, not one. This is the greatest fraud ever been perpetrated in the world, that for 14 years of my life, no one would talk about the true history of the country. So as time went by, it seemed to me, unconsciously, as it turns out, that all the elders around me, in telling me these stories, had pushed me into writing books about these things. And then I wrote a book called Convincing Ground, about the war in Australia for the possession of the land. And that led me to writing Dark Emu, because in the research, research is an incredibly important part of writing. In the research for the book of Convincing Ground, I started reading things like Sir Thomas Mitchell, great Australian explorer, rode through 9 miles of stooked grain. Now, he was the first white man to pass through that area. And he was talking about a field of harvest where the grain had been cut by someone and made into haystacks. And I just stopped at that passage and stared at it, thinking to myself, how could I get through 16 years of education, never, ever having read that before, never having been directed to it by school teachers. None of my school teachers was an axe murderer, as far as I could work out, but they had obscured Australian history to me. Was it because they didn't know it either? Was it that this great fraud that has been perpetrated in Australia had blindfolded everybody? Like a great disease that had descended upon the Australian population and blinded us all, made us all deaf. So by that stage, I decided I would have to read everything I could find about the first white man in any part of Australia and what that person saw. Fortunately, there were also some white women. And my experience of that was that the women were far more open and far more involved in Aboriginal life than the men. Is that because the men had been riding through Aboriginal camps and shooting and slashing with swords? And was that the thing that made them close their minds, close their hearts to Aboriginal Australia, whereas the women had a different relationship? Was that it? Well, it didn't matter, because the fact was that we just didn't know. So I read through all this evidence, and every time I read anything, what was coming through to me was that this person, in being the first white person in a region of Australia, saw Aboriginal people making a dam. In another region, Western Australia, for instance, the first white man came across roads that had been made by Aboriginal people. And along those roads, every kilometre and a half, there was a well. And those wells have been created so that people could water the plants that they wanted to grow for their food. None of this I'd heard. In Melbourne, I read that the first white man to start a farm there noticed that Aboriginal people had terraced the hillsides of Melbourne in the production of murnong or yam daisy. In Tasmania, the people had built houses out of whalebone and sods. In Victoria, one of the houses that had been built by people out of stone and timber and earth and clay was capable of holding 50 people. I was for 5 years, I was in a complete state of shock as I read this and started to contemplate what it meant for the intelligence of an entire nation that none of this had ever been mentioned in school. None of it. What's going on? How can you do that? What happens that a whole nation for 250 years is completely blind and deaf to a really important story? And if people are building roads, if they're building dams, if they're harvesting fields, if they have a story which explains that the whale has a pelvis and that once that whale walked on land. Now, Aboriginal people knew that for thousands of years. White Australian scientists found that out 30 years ago. If you've got a society which is so complex, so sophisticated, that they know this story about the whale long before Europeans have worked it out, then you have to pay credence to it. Not because, you have to go all sooky about what happened to Aboriginal people. You have to know it because it's part of your own history, because it's part of human history. And if you don't want to know it, why don't you want to know it? Do you want to be dumb? Do you want to spend your life dumb? And in Australia, it seems to me that often we choose to be ignorant. We choose to be unintelligent. We choose to be dumb. And I'm an ex-school teacher. I loved my kids. All the kids in my classes, I bloody loved them. And I wanted them to know what the world was like. I wanted them to know it, warts and all. I wanted them to know that there was good and bad and that they could navigate themselves, the good and the bad. They didn't have to be one or the other. They could make positive choices in their life. And I want all Australian kids to do that. And this is why I write, because I want I want us to be better. I think it's important to be better, not worse. I think it's important for us to have a long conversation about ever going to war, instead of it being a 15-minute conversation in Parliament by 60 white men deciding that we will go and kill Muslims in some other part of the world. That's not good enough for me. And if we want to change and be a better nation, then we need some examples. Let's say, look at Aboriginal governance, how Aboriginal people decided to govern the nature of the human, because the human is an animal, and it's an animal like any untrained puppy that can misbehave. So how did our old people decide to handle human nature? Well, those old people at some stage, I don't know when, although one of my closest friends in Western Australia told me that her old people told her that the whale taught them to speak. Now, if, a lot of scientists sort of just assume I'm talking about metaphor, but what if the whale actually did teach humans to speak? And when speaking to those people, they said the first word that humans learnt was, and that is the slap of the whale's tail on the water. The second word that they heard was the voice of the bird. So is this a metaphor or is this the truth? Before humans learnt to speak, they were instructed by creatures that could already speak. This is talking about incredibly ancient civilization. Now, it may be a metaphor, but what if it's not? And that's what I would like us to consider. But those people at some stage also started talking about how to govern the human animal, how to govern its mind, its moral code, its ethics, its behaviour, its instructions to its own children. And those old people decided that everybody would take part in the culture. There wouldn't be famous musicians and famous singers. There wouldn't be famous artists. Everybody would be involved in the culture. Some would be better dancers than others. Some would be better artists than others. Some would be the best dancers in their community, but everybody would take part. And those communities would celebrate the whole experience of everybody's artistic practice. They decided, those old people, that everybody would have enough to eat, that everybody could share in all the food that was made, collected, gathered by those people. Everybody would have it. Everybody would have a place where they could sleep. No one was cast out of the community. There was those people who broke law, LORE, would be punished, but no one was cast out. Everybody was given the opportunity to be fed and housed and take part in the community. You look at every country in the world now, you tell me how many allow for every citizen to be treated like that. You find me a country where that's possible, and you will amaze me. I've spent my life trying to do this. And as every day goes by, I find myself more and more in awe of those old people. I find myself thinking, why here? Why Australia? Why did those old people alone, of all the people in the world, decide to have a peaceful society? Why did they choose not to have a king and a queen? Why did they choose not to have an army? Why did they choose not to have a guillotine? Why did they choose not to have a hangman's noose? It's an incredible moment in human life on this planet. And I am biased, but I also try to be rigorous, intellectually rigorous, using my brain to be fair. That's what that means to me. And I say to myself, how come they alone decided to be fair, to be kind, to be sharing? It's a great moment in world society, world culture, and we've never bloody investigated it. Our old people did, and Aboriginal people do to this very day. But this country, with all its academic excellence, all its economic excellence, all the good people of Australia have remained blind to Aboriginal culture, society, governance and excellence. I reckon it's about time we pulled up our socks and got into it without prejudice, without shame, without feeling sorry. Just get on with it. Stop feeling sorry. Just get on with it. Learn your country's history. Thanks,
Bruce, thank you so much for joining us and sharing so much knowledge in such a short space of time. And you know, one of the things that that I find about your work and the knowledge that you've been able to pass on for so many of us to then understand more is that idea of equality and of fairness and of an equal share. I think is something which I just feel like should be normal to the way we live, that we should live a world where everybody is included, not excluded. And I think the other part, which is fundamental to the work that we've been doing for 16 years and so many people believe in, is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander genius, full stop. That's the story. And we start with that genius and that intelligence and that understanding. Then we get to build a very, very different archetype of what our expectations are of Aboriginal kids and what heroes look like and what that mythology and reality is. And so I thank you for your work. At the other end of the spectrum, a bit closer to the younger side, I've been lucky over the last 16 years to see 5,000 university students volunteer to be mentors with AIME and mainly non-Indigenous young people who are going to go on and be the leaders of our countries in different ways. And they want a real connection with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I've seen 20,000 Indigenous kids who are stunning and complex and are carrying on a lot of those ideas of the past and making their way today. And I think that the work that you've done and the work that so many people have done before us gives us a stage to deliver on that promise and that challenge that you've set us as a nation to try and make sure that knowledge, that genius, that equality from this country, in this country's DNA, is not lost. It's revived and given its place on a really strong mantle for us into the future. So thank you for what you've done. Your work hasn't gone unnoticed. Your work is inspiring many of us to carry on the torch and charge ahead and try and create that change that you're hoping for.
It really is our pleasure for you to be here today. And I know tons of kids, including myself, would love to have like the Dark Emu to be read and taught in our schools. Isn't that right, guys? Sienna, Elise?
Yes. I have it right here.
We'll have to get we'll get a virtual autograph happening somehow through the cameras. Hey Zephyr, is there anything that you'd like to know of Bruce? We might take a couple of questions from the YouTube chat line as well if anyone wants to throw any questions. But Zephyr or Sienna or Elise, have you got anything that you'd like to know of Bruce while we've got him?
Well, when you were like researching all your stuff for Dark Emu, what was like the most like surprising facts or the evidence that you've come across?
Well, I was being criticised by a lot of university academics for telling lies. They thought I was telling lies. There are still some people who think that. But that prompted me to realise that if I was going to convince Australians, I would have to use sources that they respected. And the only sources that seemed to me that they respected was the white Australian explorers. So I decided to use their evidence as the evidence to tell the story of Aboriginal Australia. And so the first book I picked up was Sir Thomas Mitchell's Journeys into Tropical Australia. And I wasn't 80 pages into the book until I read that comment that I mentioned before of Sir Thomas Mitchell riding through 9 miles of stooped grain. And I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned that I could be as old as I was and never having heard it before. So that was the greatest surprise to me. But then I just kept on getting surprised for 5 years. And there were moments when I cried and in frustration at what I read had never been taught to me or taught to anyone. It had been hidden. But then I also thought, well, you know, anger's not going to get me anywhere. Sorrow's not going to get me anywhere. We have to tell this story. So for the next 5 years, I just kept on finding one after another, after another, after another. It didn't happen in just one corner of Australia or for one clan. It happened across the board. Some people lived in houses, some didn't. Some people grew grain and grew yams, some didn't. But all of the people in Australia had law, had a code of conduct that was based on the old people's wisdom. And that was my inspiration.
That challenge of finding that moment where you get the really cool insight, 70 pages in, how have you trained your brain to be able to see it? And as you're looking through those 70 pages and you're reading through all that different information, what makes a fact really stand out when it grabs you? Is it part of the sentence, or what is it that just grabs you straight away?
I think, I mentioned earlier how I became cynical about Australian life very early. And because of that, after about 12 or 13, I began reading everything I was given with skepticism. I was curious about everything, but I didn't necessarily believe I had to believe it. I had to analyse it. So I started analysing every sentence. Why did they write this? What do they believe that made them write it like that? So I still read like that. I read with an open mind, but with skepticism. I withhold my belief because I'm always trying to look at it through Aboriginal eyes. What does this mean for Aboriginal people? How does this person talk about Aboriginal people? What does it mean? And that's how I read now. It was a habit, I think, that I was inducted into by some really wise members of my own family, but really wise members of the wider Aboriginal community who I think saw that I was interested and they saw that I was serious, and they also saw that I could work hard. And I think that's why they gave me stories.
Yeah, challenging what's put in front of us, not for the sake of being an obstacle, but to try and understand, I think it's a critical door that we get to open. When we open that, then we start to open up all this different information as we're moving around, and then it's relentless. So, Bruce, we could go on forever, and the question that we'll start heading very much into the world of philosophical and wondering what we can ever understand or ever trust when we're taking on the lens of critique and moving through the complexity of life. I wanted to thank you for joining us today. We've got lots of people on the chat line that have just said really beautiful things. Rory Togo said, Bruce Pascoe's books are incredible and should be in every classroom. Nomad the Magician said, love Bruce Pascoe. Dan Single said, what a good story. What a storyteller. Benita said, there are so many truths we don't teach kids. The more honest and open we are with our young people, the brighter our future for us all. lots of people really engaged and wanting to get to work and see things change. So thank you so much for joining us today, Bruce, and sharing your work, and know that you've got a lot of people behind you in the AIME world and on Imagination TV, and more broadly just wanting to carry the torch for the work that you've done. So thank you for giving us the stage.
Thank you.
Zephyr, how was that? That's the end of your co-hosting gig. How'd you go?
So excited. I'm like, had a really great time. And like, anytime you want me to do it again, I'd love to.
Cool as. Well, I just got off talking to some of the YouTube guys this morning, and they're going to let me curate a couple of playlists on their learning platform. So one is going to be an Indigenous Australian playlist. And so what I've decided is that for all the co-hosts that come on the show, I'm going to give you guys a chance to pitch in your own YouTube channel under what you want to learn in your life. And then we'll be able to unearth lots and lots of young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices into the world who are going on a learning journey and can hopefully take us along the way. So you might be able to start your own YouTube channel, Zephyr, so we'll follow up afterwards. Thanks very much, Sienna. Thanks, Elise. And thanks to Lindisfarne High School, to Stuart joining us earlier, and everyone for being a part of Imagination TV today. To Bruce Pascoe, if you want to be a part of the feature film and connect in with what we're doing, jump on AIMmentoring.com and keep sharing the word of imagination and the work we're doing here as we work to try and bring a mentor into every kid's home every single day. Thanks for joining us on Imagination TV. We'll join you tomorrow at 12 noon Australian Eastern Standard Time for the artist segment as we round out the week. Thanks, everybody.